Max Planck, the father of quantum physics, he said, all matter originates and exists only by a virtue of force. We must assume behind this force a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. That's Max Planck. What is that? That's the unified field. Consciousness is the unified field. It is the foundational fabric of existence itself. And this is a mind. And the objective mind is what we call God, Brahman, Tao. What is going on, everybody? Matt Sano here from Soaring the Rose. Thank you again for tuning in and checking out my podcast. It means a lot. So today we're going to be talking about consciousness, the big topic. I'd really kind of say the biggest topic. Going to get into kind of how I believe that consciousness is foundational and that matter is not foundational, and this whole notion that, consciousness exists because of certain conditions are met by matter. I will say that I think that the certain conditions that are met by matter, i.e. DNA, brain, etc., are what allows the eternal consciousness to experience and bring its awareness to the current experience within this vibrational frequency spectrum that you wish to experience. So we'll begin all that fun stuff today. But first thing, please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy this video. And of course, you can click the link down below to get a copy of my free ebook and more information on how to join my membership site. Okay? All right. Thank you. So consciousness is foundational, but people say, well, what about matter? Isn't matter foundational? Isn't everything just matter? Well, let's dive into that, because what is matter, right? I mean, most of us understand that everything is made out of protons, electrons, and neutrons. We can get into quarks and all this, but really, that's really kind of the building blocks that all of us kind of assume based upon our education is kind of what is going on and what everything is made out of. And really, with modern day kind of quantum science and, quantum field theory, we're kind of understanding that that's kind of not really the case. It is, but it goes much deeper than that. And so let's kind of dive into that, because I really want to kind of get into that nitty gritty so that way you can understand where I'm coming from. Okay? So let's begin this kind of journey real quick with science and matter and all this. So the atom is protons, electrons, and neutrons, but what are they? Right? What is a proton? What is it made out of? What is an electron made out of? Right? Like this, this desk is made out of wood. This laptop is made out of, I don't even know, what is that, plastic or whatever, right? We're made out of bone and skin. What is an atom made out of? And in order to answer that, let's start with kind of the modern day view of science, which starts with Newton. So Sir Isaac Newton, he was, you could say, was the father of modern day science. I mean, it obviously predated him, but he was a major factor in our understanding of science today. And he was mostly talking about how things are solid objects that are interacting with one another. And so, I'm obviously going to be going through this very quickly, but that was the basis of it. And his issue was, how do things interact at a distance, right? And so Michael Faraday comes along, where we get the Faraday cage, and he kind of found out that space actually isn't empty. It's made of these fields, and specifically the electromagnetic field. And that kind of really helped to answer Newton's question, which was, how do the planets move, right? What is moving the planets? what is the action at a distance. And so with Faraday and Maxwell, they found that there's an electromagnetic field that is predominant throughout all of space. And then going further, somebody named Max Planck comes along, and he really becomes the father of quantum physics, where quanta means little packets. He found that energy moves in packets, and I think that's the frequency, right? And so he named them little quanta. And so that's kind of where it all comes from. And now getting into Paul Dirac, he kind of combined the two into having a quantum fields. And so understanding that everything kind of has its own field. So a proton has a proton field. An electron has an electron field. Quarks have quark fields. And so what we call protons and electrons and neutrons, what we call particles, are really excitations of these fields by the interaction and exchange of energy. And so there's an interaction with all these fields, which then creates what are called excitations, which we then measure as particles. So I know that was a lot and kind of choppy and all this, but let me just give a real quick recap. So we have Newton, who described existence as solid objects interacting with one another. And then Faraday came along and said that there's actually fields in between these solid objects. Max Planck came along and said that, the subatomic world, there exist these quantas of energy. And then Paul Dirac essentially said that these quantas of energy are interacting with one another, which then create the physical objects that we perceive as particles. And these particles then interact with one another in order to create matter, in order to create physicality. Okay? So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our identity? Because we think that we're this. But this is just made out of fields. Fields of what? Fields of energy. And so ultimately all that we are is energy. Because everything is just the interaction and exchange of energy. So in terms of our identity, of who we are ultimately just energy. We are just energy interacting with itself. There's different forms of energy, but really it's just energy. And so what does that mean about consciousness then? How does consciousness come about? Well, according to reductive materialism, consciousness comes about because of certain conditions, i.e., the interactions of the physicality in order to create bodies and minds and brains in order to have consciousness come about. So matter is the progenitor of consciousness. Now, that's all well and good. And if that was reality, then that's reality. But what about things like spirituality? What about things like out-of-body experiences? What about near-death experiences? What about astral projection? What about remote viewing? Now, if these things are true, which there has been plenty and plenty and plenty of examples of this, of people having near-death experiences and traveling and experiencing different dimensions, or people, coming out of their bodies and exploring. I mean, happened to my friend. And especially the remote viewing. I mean, there's been plenty of scientific evidence about remote viewing. And that remote viewing is 100% scientifically proven to exist. If all of these things are true, then that means that matter cannot be the progenitor of consciousness. Consciousness exists separately outside of the body. It's not reliant upon the body to exist. And if you want more proof of this, I suggest you check out Russel Targ, Ingo Swann, and Stephen A. Schwartz. I'll put some links down below so you can check that out. I mean, Russel Targ talks about for 23 years he worked for the CIA doing remote viewing experiments. And he said, after all of that, after everything that he's seen, he goes, it's 100% accurate that remote viewing exists. I mean, they were able to predict things. They were able to accurately depict things that were miles and miles and miles and miles and miles away. And it's all been scientifically proven, scientifically accurate. Stephen A. Schwartz talks about a story where he was in Egypt and he wanted to use remote viewers, people who have this ability, to find archaeological dig spots. And he told this story where he actually came across other people who were looking for this tomb, or I think it was just some type of chamber that they were looking for. And so Stephen Schwartz said, hey, maybe we can help you out. And so the people that they ran into said, yeah, we're looking for a chamber that should be, X amount of feet away or in this kind of generalized location. What can you do? And I believe he had 2 or 3 remote viewers with him, and they all found this chamber that was buried below the sand that had, I believe it was like purple tiles and a kind of altar kind of in the middle. And they all described the same thing. And so, sure enough, these other archaeologists, they went there and they dug up in the location that these remote viewers said it would be. And sure enough, they found it. And it was described exactly like these remote viewers said. And he says that's just one example. Ingo Swann is probably the most famous remote viewer, and he worked with the CIA as well. So if you're interested in all that, check all that out, because they're it's not just woo-woo whatever. These are scientists. These are physicists, especially Russel Targ. He's a scientist, and he was tasked by the CIA to figure this out. And he essentially scientifically proved that remote viewing is real and it does exist. So what does that mean? It means that matter is not the progenitor of consciousness, and that the conditions of matter create the conditions for the awareness of the consciousness, the innate consciousness, to experience the reality that you're currently experiencing, i.e., incarnation. And I think that's done by the consciousness tuning its frequency into the frequency of the individual DNA of the body that you wish to experience, yourself within, and experience the reality that you wish to. So what does this mean for our identity? Going back to what I said before, we're just energy. So if we're just energy, and matter is not the progenitor of consciousness, then this may be a leap. But couldn't we deduce that this energy is conscious? And that this energy is consciousness itself? I mean, this lines up with a lot of the notions of the will of the Tao, the will of Brahman, the will of God, that through the will of this innate, eternal consciousness, matter and form take hold. They take form. So again, what does this mean about our identity? It means that who you are, who we are, ultimately is this eternal conscious energy. That is ultimately who you are. Right? How are you not? How are you not this energy? Where's the disconnect? If all that exists is this energy, and all that exists is this consciousness, and then all that exists is this conscious energy, then that means that is what you are. That is who you are. And so really what separates you from everything else is what makes you unique. Your energy, your expression, your uniqueness, right? That's what makes you a droplet rather than the ocean. And that's what we call ego. So you see, ego is not a four-letter word. Without ego, you would not exist, because there would be nothing to separate you from everything else. Because all that exists is this energy, the ocean of energy. Yes? And all of existence is simply that exchange of the one energy, the one conscious energy. I mean, even science is saying so. Where science is, I don't want to use the term lacking, because I respect the hell out of science and scientists. But where they are lacking currently is consciousness. And I think for me, what they're missing is the gap between matter and consciousness. And for me, that's what we call chi, or ki, or prana. That's the same energy on that level. Right? You have the physical, you have the astral, and then you have the mind aspect. It's all one energy, just in different forms, really in different densities. And it's really phenomenal to see that consciousness is now in the ethers, if you will, within the scientific community. And that's really nice to see, because I think that they've hit a ceiling. They don't really know where else to go, which is fantastic. Because I think now they're starting to understand that mind is important. The observer is important. It's not just stuff. And I think very soon scientists will start to understand that the foundational fabric of life is life. Because that's what this is. This is life. Right? And so everything is alive. Just because it's an inanimate object doesn't mean it's not made of the same conscious living energy that everything else is. But I think that if science begins to understand chi or ki or prana, then I think that'll be a wonderful bridge and will explode their understanding of reality. I mean, what's that quote by Tesla? Right? The day that science studies the immaterial phenomenon, it will advance in 10 years more than it has in the last 100 or something like that. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Right? Because the big question is, how does something immaterial, such as consciousness, affect the material? Where does the rubber meet the road? And so for me, that's chi, that's ki, that's prana, also known as orgone. And there's been many, many people who have done wonderful work with this stuff, but, we don't hear about that, of course. But this chi, this ki, this prana, it's very real. And for me, it is that gap between matter and consciousness, because it's all one continuum, you see. It's all one energy, just manifesting itself in various forms. It's all one continuum. There is no separation. There's no separation between matter and spirit, matter and consciousness. It's all one. It's just a density. It's an emanation, right? Based on will. The will of the Tao, the will of Brahman, the will of God. Right? And so consciousness is this energy. And I know that scientists are looking for the unified field. They're looking for this kind of unified construct of understanding. And so in my humble opinion, I think that consciousness itself is the unified field. I think that consciousness itself, living life force essence, is the unified field that we're all looking for. And the way to access that connection between matter and spirit is through ki, chi, prana, orgone, etc. That's my humble opinion. And I find it kind of crazy to me that science has become this kind of religion of atheism, when a lot of their major people that they look up to have quotes specifically talking about a mind or a omnipresent consciousness. Let me read some. So, I mean, you have Isaac Newton himself, right? The admirable arrangement and harmony of the universe could only have come from the plan of an omniscient and omnipotent being. That sound like an atheist to you? Well, people say, oh, well, that was back in the day, and okay. I mean, Einstein, right? I, like God, do not play dice with the universe. Oh, he's being coy. Okay. Well, this is my favorite, right? Max Planck, the father of quantum physics, which just revolutionized the way we look at the world. He said, all matter originates and exists only by a virtue of force. We must assume behind this force a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. That's Max Planck. What is that? That's the unified field. Consciousness is the unified field. It is the foundational fabric of existence itself. And this is a mind. And the objective mind is what we call God, Brahman, Tao. And who we are subjective aspects of the objective mind, right? We are droplets in the ocean, right? Consciousness is the water. All that exists is water. And it's all just one conscious living life force expressing itself in infinite ways. And the experience of that is what we call time. But I'll be getting into time, and I'll be explaining this further as we go. But I want to leave you with that. I want to leave you with this understanding that what we call physicality, even science, modern day mainstream science, is showing us that what we perceive to be matter really wasn't what we thought it was. And all that exists is energy interacting with itself. And this field of energy interacting with itself, and it's my opinion that energy is conscious, is living, and it is manifesting reality through will. So have a think on that. It's a big topic. Like I said, it's probably the most important topic and the biggest topic we can talk about. But I wanted to get this out there now so that way we can kind of delve into this philosophy that I have in further detail as we go. So thanks again for listening, and have yourself a nice little contemplation session about all that. Shoot me an email if you want to chat about it, or you can be a member and we can chat about it regularly. So thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace. If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to click the link down below where you can get a copy of your free ebook and more information on how to become a member to my membership site. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.